all-new Hot Rod Garage presented by Lincoln Tech, and this time we also have an all-new project vehicle. That is a 1970 Chevy Chevelle, and it belongs to Dave Leonard, who's the owner of Original Parts Group. OPG is the company that makes and sells everything you need to restore one of these cars, but the problem is he has a whole bunch of restored muscle cars, and he wants a daily driver that has more modern conveniences, which is what we're going to do to this car over the course of 3 or 4 episodes. And you know what's really convenient? An HT502 crate motor. And on this episode, we're going to show you how to make that look like a 1970 SS 454 engine. Now, the other thing we're going to do this time is introduce who may be our new host of Hot Rod Garage. You will let us know what you think of Tony Angelo, who's a pro drifter who's going to be working with us. And we've got George Lopez from OPG. But first, Clarence Barnes brings you tips from Lincoln Tech.
Hey, I'm Tony Angelo. You probably saw me on Roadkill. This is my buddy George from OPG.
What's going on, Tony? What we want to do with this Chevelle is add performance but keep originality, which is usually our goal. So this is what we got right here.
And the motor we have for this Chevelle is an HT502. It's a really cool motor. It's pretty affordable. You can get it for about $6,100. And this is a big torquey motor. It makes 377 horsepower and a monstrous 512 pound-feet of torque.
Yeah, that's what makes it go.
And what's nice is it's got 8 3/4 to 1 compression, and you can run it on the junk pump gas you get out here in California.
Yeah.
George, what are we going to do with this motor here today?
Well, that's what we're here for. We're making this motor basically look like a vintage 1970 SS 454 engine, which is the LS5, LS6 style. And there's a couple of small challenges in converting that or finishing that job. Is the cloning aspect of it is going to be the biggest thing compared to the vintage one. So valve covers, we're going to paint it orange to begin with. We're going to add the full conduction parts on there. At first glance, when you pop the hood, it will look like a factory SS 454.
So we're going to make it look old, but have a bunch of new performance in there.
Exactly, yeah. And I know we'll get really close with all the parts from OPG.
Now that we've got the motor taped up, we're going to go ahead and paint it classic Chevy orange with some duple-color paint.
Actually, one of the things we had to do before we painted is change the oil pan on this Crate 502. It comes from GM with a truck oil pan, but to retrofit it onto an early car like a 70 Chevelle or any A body, you have to get one of the GM conversion kits. What that does is it allows the modern engine to fit into the old frame without having any clearance issues. These Gen 6 blocks have a different one-piece rear main seal and a different lip in front of the timing chain cover. So if you use an original oil pan from back then, it actually won't fit. So you have to buy that.
Cool, all right, well, let's get this thing sprayed.
Now that we have the engine painted, we're going to add a couple of these factory engine lift brackets. They're needed and used when you drop the motor into the car. So these basically, one just goes here in the front and one goes towards the back. Second, as a note, we decided to keep the original 502 intake manifold that came with the Crate engine. You can use any intake manifold you want, GM or aftermarket, but we figured this would work best with the MSD Atomic EF5 that Tony's holding right now, we're about to install.
George is pulling off the modern cast aluminum valve covers that come in the HT502. The HT502 doesn't need a tall valve cover, so we're going to put on some reproduction stamped steel chrome covers to keep it this retro look.
We're totally departing from originality when it comes to the ignition system on the car. We are going with the ProBillet MSD rated run distributor, but what we are doing is we changed it over to a black cap. We painted the original blaster coil from red to black, and we're running the black wires from MSD. That way at first glance, you pop the hood, everything looks original. Ready?
Cool. So now we're going to assemble the entire accessory system using pulleys and brackets from OPG. It's all OE stuff. We're going to use a long water pump style, the same as with the 454, so it's going to look original. The only thing we're going to use that's not original looking is going to be the aftermarket air conditioning system, which we'll cover later.
And finally, we're topping off this 502 with the all-original style Cal induction air cleaner that we got from OPG. It does a great job covering the MSD EFI, and it's perfect for that all-original look.
Here's the final assembled engine ready to install. Before next episode where we get it running, we're going to put an overdrive trans on it. We're going to change the brake booster and the steering gearbox, take a couple things off the firewall, and we're going to drop it in and get it running. This engine isn't going to fool any purists into thinking it's a real deal SS 454. But it does fit the theme of a practical daily driven muscle car really well. All right, that's it for wrenching on this episode of Hot Rod Garage presented by Lincoln Tech. Now stay tuned for a Q&A session with David Freiberger and Mike Finnegan from Before we get this engine in, we took advantage of the open space. We installed some more OPG goodies. Put in a brake booster and master cylinder, a new wiper motor, and a rebuilt steering gearbox. We also went ahead and put stock style exhaust manifolds on the engine. Normally I'd like to see a big gnarly set of headers on there, a little more peak power, a little more flow, but the owner wants a nice quiet car with no exhaust leaks, so these will work out just great. Before we drop the engine in, we're going to attach this Gearstar Performance 4L80E transmission. The Gearstar 4L80E is a hell of a deal at $21.95. It's a brand new transmission from top to bottom, new bearings, steel plates and clutches, and a lot of the metal parts are heat treated. That price also includes a torque converter and a brand new steel pan. We are using the level 2 variant offered by Gearstar, which is rated to handle 500 horsepower and 500 foot-pounds of torque. To use this modern 4-speed overdrive electronically controlled transmission, we are going to use the TCM transmission controller from MSD. Finally, OPG offers this trick overdrive shifter that fits into the original console. It will allow us to use this modern transmission while keeping the interior look purely 70s. This all cast iron HT502 is a heavy beast. It took us a couple of tries to get it weighted right on the chain so that we could clear this cross member and still tuck it into the transmission tunnel. Once we got that sorted out, and I got the help of a couple of guys, it did drop right onto the engine mounts and it bolted right up. The only thing you want to remember is that we did have to change the oil pan. The oil pan that comes on this crate motor is for a truck, and we had to swap it over to a regular 454 Chevelle pan. Now that we've got the engine and trans in place and the engine bolted in, we're going to support the transmission with this G-force cross member that OPG supplied us. Luis is going to give me a hand putting it in. So just kind of get yours in that slot in the front. You get it a little more, there you go. Ah, stop twisting it. Thank you. There we go. All right, it's only 6 bolts. Once you get them tightened up, we can move on to the drive shaft. With any swap of this nature, you're gonna have to get a custom drive shaft made. We had ours made by a local drivetrain specialist. You may not have one in your town. If you don't, a nice tip is you can go to an 18-wheel shop or like a big rig shop. Those guys make drive shafts all the time and they should be able to make you one. Another thing you wanna remember is when you're measuring for your custom drive shaft is that the vehicle has to be at ride height. If you don't, the measurement won't even be close. And what you want to do is put it on 4 ramps, or if you can crawl under it at drive height, you're going to measure from the snout of the output shaft and the transmission right to the flat on the yoke of the rear end. Give your drive shaft guy that measurement, you should be good to go. With all the mechanical stuff bolted together, now we get into the fun stuff. We're going to run this really cool MSD Atomic EFI on this car. It's going to be reliable, it's going to be nice and crisp, and it's self-tuning, which is super cool. To do that, though, you need to make provisions for a high-pressure fuel pump and a return. You may look at your fuel tank and see these fuel vents and think, why don't I just return my fuel there? You shouldn't, and I'll tell you why. It's because these are far too high up in the tank, and if you were to return your fuel here, they would just spray all over the place and really aerate the hell out of the fuel. You don't want to do that. What you can do is you can take your fuel sending unit out, and if it has a vent in it like this one did, you can hog that hole out and have someone braze in a 3/8 line. So what we did is we took this to a local radiator shop because welding on a gas tank is a bad idea. Even if you think you've got to clean it, will probably still explode on you. They brazed on some AN fittings for us, drilled this out, and brazed in a larger return line. It is not the cleanest work I've ever seen. They did an ugly, ugly job. We're going to put it in anyway. You're not going to be able to see it. We've run our feed line and our return line on this car front to back, and I just mounted the fuel pump and the pre-filter. Technically, you don't have to run a return line on this system, but I would always recommend it. It's It's going to deal better with altitude, and if you did a pulse width non-return system, it's going to burn out that pump much faster. This is the way to go with this system. We're going to toss the tank back in, connect these fuel lines, and we'll basically be done under the car. Then we can move forward to mounting the EFI stuff, connecting the fuel lines and the regulator, and just about fire this thing up. Now that we've got the fuel tank back in and the fuel lines run, I went ahead and welded up the bung for the O2 sensor. Position of the sensor is actually really critical. Ideally, you want about 2 to 4 inches behind the collector. I moved it down about 10 inches because I want to hide all the EFI stuff in this car and make it look original. You have to make sure that you get a really nice weld on here and that you have no leaks before the O2 sensor, because this system relies very heavily on the feedback from this sensor. So any air introduced before it is going to totally screw up what the computer sees as an air-fuel ratio. Got it. All right, now that we've got everything done underneath the car, I'm going to install the fuel pressure regulator, put on the distributor cap and the spark plug wires, connect a couple other sensors. This throttle body bolts on just like a carburetor. 4 bolts, throttle cable and return spring, and some fuel lines, and you're good to go. OPG supplied us with the biggest stock radiator they make. It's a 4-core, made for a big block car with AC, so it should work great for this. Okay, we've got everything buttoned up under the hood. I put the initial setup into the computer, and hopefully this thing should fire right up. All right, now I can set the timing and check for leaks. Hopefully take this thing out on the road. Hell yeah. Once we got this thing fired up and broken in, I took it over to this drag strip. It runs really clean and pulls really hard. Even considering it has an open diff and a 308 rear end, I was able to run a 14-second flat quarter mile, about 103 miles an hour. That is very fast for this setup, and I was really pumped on the whole thing. This car is bitchin', and I can't wait to get some gears in it and a diff and see how much faster we can go. Everything we've done with this car has been to build a very streetable, really fun to drive car. So the dude spec'd out a motor that's like tame, reliable, has power everywhere. It's not tuned for peak power, but like it's really fun to drive around. It also does great burnouts and stuff. I actually, in my head, thought this would be kind of lame, and in execution, it's awesome.